It was a calm evening when I walked into the small, cozy restaurant. The kind of place where the smell of good food hits you the moment you step inside. The lighting was soft, and the noise from the city outside was muted, replaced by the sound of plates clinking and quiet conversations. My friend had invited me here for dinner, but honestly, I wasn't expecting anything more than just a simple meal. Little did I know, the night would change when I noticed her. She was the chef, working in the open kitchen at the back of the restaurant. I couldn't help but watch her as she moved around the kitchen. She was confident, her hands quick and skilled as she prepared the dishes. Everything she did seemed so natural, like she had been in that kitchen for years. There was something mesmerizing about the way she handled the ingredients, the way her movements were calm but purposeful. When she finally looked up, our eyes met. There was no big moment, no dramatic stare, it was just a brief glance, but I felt something. It was almost like she saw right through me, like she knew exactly what I was thinking. And I wasn't sure what that was, but I was certainly intrigued. She didn't look away right away. There was something in her gaze that made me wonder if she had noticed me watching her, and the idea of being caught made my heart skip a beat. I quickly turned my attention back to the menu, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still watching me. And I couldn't help but wonder, what was she thinking? Was I imagining things, or was there something between us? Later, when my friend and I were eating, I caught a glimpse of her again as she moved between the tables. She smiled, a small but knowing smile, as if she could sense what was happening between us without even trying. It wasn't a flirtatious smile, but there was something in it that made my pulse quicken. As the evening went on, I found myself looking for her more often, waiting for the next moment when our eyes would meet again. There was an unspoken connection between us, one that neither of us had named, but it was there, hanging in the air like a secret. After dinner, I thought the evening was over, but then I saw her again. She was standing by the stove, stirring something in a large pot. Her focus was intense, and I couldn't help but watch her as she worked. But this time, she didn't just glance up, she looked directly at me, and that's when she spoke. "Hey, come over here," she called, her voice smooth and calm. "I've got something you should try." I didn't expect it, and I definitely wasn't prepared for the sudden rush of excitement that flooded me. She was inviting me to try something. Me, out of all the people in the room. My mind raced with thoughts. Should I go? Was it a test? She held out a small plate with something that smelled incredible. I hesitated for a second before walking over. "Taste this," she said again, almost teasing. But slowly. There was something in the way she said it, almost like a challenge, or maybe a game. I could feel the heat from the kitchen on my face as I reached for the plate. The dish looked amazing, the colors bright and fresh, but it was the smell that made me pause for a moment. It was a mixture of spices, something warm and inviting, yet mysterious. I took a bite, and the explosion of flavor surprised me. It was rich, spicy, and balanced with just the right amount of sweetness. I didn't know how to describe it, but it made me stop for a second and take in the full experience. My senses were overwhelmed by the intensity of it. As I chewed, I noticed she was watching me, her eyes studying my reaction. There was a small, satisfied smile on her lips, but she didn't speak. The moment felt intimate, as though we were sharing something without saying a word. I swallowed and then looked at her, feeling the heat of the kitchen and her gaze. She raised an eyebrow slightly, as if asking what I thought. I wanted to say something, anything, but all I could do was nod, trying to find words that matched the experience. It was perfect, but at the same time, there was something about it that made me nervous. The challenge she set with her words, but slowly, felt like it was more than just about the food. It was about us, about this strange and growing tension between us that neither of us had spoken about, but we both knew it was there. The restaurant began to quiet down after the last few tables left, and I found myself still lingering in the back, not quite ready to leave. My friend had gone, but I stayed behind, not because of the food, but because of her. I couldn't explain it, but there was something about her that made me want to stay, to keep watching her work. She was moving around the kitchen, getting everything cleaned up, but the way she moved made it look like she was still in the middle of creating something new. She was lost in the rhythm of it all, and I couldn't help but notice the calmness in the way she worked. I stood by the door, unsure if I should leave or stay. And then, she noticed me. She turned to look at me, and this time, there was no teasing or challenge in her gaze. She just smiled, a soft, almost inviting smile, as if welcoming me into her world. "Want to help?" she asked, her voice gentle, yet firm. I wasn't sure what to say. The idea of standing next to her, helping in the kitchen, felt both strange and comforting at the same time. I walked over, the space between us close but not uncomfortable. She handed me a spoon to stir the sauce, her fingers brushing mine as she passed it to me. I didn't pull away. We didn't speak much as we worked, but there was a certain understanding between us. The kitchen, which had been a busy, chaotic place earlier, now felt like a quiet sanctuary. Every time I touched something, whether it was stirring a pot or chopping vegetables, her presence was near, warm, and unspoken. It was almost like we were creating something together, even if we didn't say a word. Her eyes occasionally flicked toward me, not with curiosity, but with quiet acknowledgement. She was comfortable in her own space, but there was a small, subtle connection growing between us with every shared task. I felt it in the way she passed me the utensils, in the way she moved closer when I needed help. The silence wasn't awkward, it was peaceful, natural. It was like we didn't need words. I could feel myself falling into a rhythm with her, and for the first time that evening, I didn't feel like an outsider. We were sharing this space, this moment, and it felt like something more than just cooking together. There was an intimacy in the air, something quiet but powerful, and I wasn't sure where it would lead, but I knew I didn't want to walk away from it. As the night went on, the atmosphere in the restaurant grew quieter. Most of the staff had left, and it was just me and her in the kitchen. I'd been hanging around longer than I'd intended, but something about the way she worked, the way she moved, kept pulling me in. It wasn't just her skills as a chef, it was something more. Something unspoken that seemed to draw us closer without either of us saying a word. She moved around the kitchen with purpose, preparing a new dish for the next day, her focus intense. The soft hum of the fridge and the gentle clatter of utensils were the only sounds, adding to the stillness that surrounded us. At times, I'd catch glimpses of her working, of the way she leaned over the counter, her hair loosely falling around her face as she focused on the details. It was an intimacy I hadn't expected to find, quiet, unassuming, but full of connection. It wasn't long before she turned to me, her eyes meeting mine in that same knowing way. The intensity between us was still there, but now it felt more comfortable. It was no longer just about curiosity or nervousness. It was about being here together, in this shared space, where we didn't have to explain anything. Words weren't necessary anymore. "You've been helping enough tonight," she said, her voice soft but with a playful tone, like she was acknowledging the way we had both fallen into the rhythm of working side by side. She handed me a small tray of vegetables to prepare. I took the tray, and as I began to chop, I felt her approach from behind me. It was a small, simple thing, but the shift in energy between us was unmistakable. Her hands came to rest on the edge of the counter beside me, and I felt the warmth of her presence so close that I could almost feel the heat radiating from her. Her breath brushed the back of my neck, and for a moment, I froze, the sharpness of the knife in my hand forgotten. It was such a small thing, her standing behind me, close enough that her arms brushed mine, but it felt like a shift. Something subtle but important passed between us in that quiet moment. I could feel the tension rise, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a kind of tension I didn't understand yet, something soft and unsure but full of possibilities. She didn't speak at first, and I didn't either. The silence was heavy but warm, like we were both giving each other space to acknowledge whatever this was between us. Then, as I continued chopping the vegetables, her hand gently touched mine. It wasn't a grab or a forceful touch, just a brief moment of contact as she passed me another utensil. Her fingers brushed mine, just for a second, but it felt like a lifetime. The feeling lingered long after she pulled her hand away, and I found myself not wanting to let go of the connection that had been made. She didn't apologize or say anything. It was just a quiet touch, a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. The moment hung in the air between us, like we both knew it meant something more than just a passing touch. It was like a quiet confirmation that whatever had been building between us had now taken a step forward. I glanced up at her, and her eyes met mine again, this time with a softness I hadn't seen before. There was no rush to speak, no need to fill the silence. The moment had passed, but the connection it left behind was still there, lingering. It was subtle, but powerful. In the stillness of the kitchen, surrounded by the quiet hum of the night, I realized that the distance between us had shifted. The space was smaller now, the air between us warmer. And though neither of us spoke of it, I knew something had changed. A line had been crossed, just a small touch, but it felt like the beginning of something more. It was late by the time the last of the plates had been cleaned, the kitchen now bathed in the soft glow of the overhead lights. The restaurant had emptied, leaving just the two of us, quietly finishing up. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound breaking the silence. The normal chaos of a busy kitchen had faded, leaving behind a calm stillness that felt strangely intimate. I wasn't sure what had come over me, but something about this quiet time together, just the two of us, felt different. I wasn't thinking about work or the food. I was thinking about her. It was hard to ignore the way the space between us had shifted over the past few hours, how every shared glance, every small touch, had started to mean something more. I felt an undeniable pull to her, a connection that was growing stronger with each passing minute. But I couldn't bring myself to say anything yet. There was still a hesitation, a quiet uncertainty about where this would lead. She was wiping down the counter when I noticed her pause, her hand still on the cloth. She wasn't looking at me directly, but I could tell her mind was somewhere else. She seemed lost in thought, and it made my heart race. I knew she was holding something back, just like I was. There was something about this moment, the way we were standing there together, the quiet weight of everything unspoken, that felt like it was leading somewhere. But I didn't know where. Finally, she turned to me. The way her eyes softened when they met mine made me feel as if I were seeing her for the first time. Not the confident, calm chef I had watched all evening, but someone else, someone with a vulnerability that she wasn't used to showing. She hesitated for a moment, like she was deciding whether or not to say what was on her mind. "You're different," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. Her words weren't a critique, nor were they an attempt at flattery. They were a simple observation, one that caught me off guard. "You actually pay attention. To the food, to the moments, to the details." There was a brief pause, and I could feel the weight of her words settle between us. She wasn't talking about the kitchen or the dishes anymore. She was talking about something deeper. About me. And it was a strange feeling, being seen so clearly, so openly. I said softly, unsure of what else to say. There was a lump in my throat, and I suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that I wasn't used to. It wasn't just about cooking anymore, it was about us, about what had been happening all night. The connection between us was real, and I couldn't pretend it wasn't anymore. She took a step closer, and I felt my breath catch. Her presence was warm, comforting, but now it was charged with something new. Her hand moved to the counter beside mine, and for a moment, she let her fingers linger there, just a fraction of an inch from mine. It was a small thing, but it was enough. "You're not like the others," she continued, her voice soft, but there was a hint of something else behind it, something deeper, like she was letting me in, allowing herself to show a side of her that she usually kept hidden. "You notice things, little things that others don't. And that's what makes you different." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. I could feel her watching me, waiting for my reaction. But I didn't know what to say. I didn't need to say anything, really. Because I knew, in that moment, that she was seeing me for who I really was, not just the young guy in the kitchen, but someone who was genuinely trying to understand her, to connect with her in a way that no one else had. And that felt like something important. Something real. The space between us had closed even more now, and there was no denying the pull between us. She was letting her guard down, just like I had. It was a quiet confession, one that neither of us had said out loud, but one that was understood in every glance, every touch, and every moment shared. For a brief second, I wondered if I should say something back, but the words didn't come. And honestly, I wasn't sure I needed to. This moment, this soft, shared silence, was enough. It was the kind of vulnerability that didn't need explanation, the kind that just existed between two people who had found something unexpected and precious in each other. And as we stood there, side by side in the quiet kitchen, the world outside seemed miles away. In that moment, nothing else mattered. It was one of those late nights when the rest of the world seemed to have slipped away, and it was just us left in the stillness of the kitchen. The restaurant had closed hours ago, but I lingered behind, not quite ready to leave. I had finished my work, but I found myself holding back, unsure of what was drawing me to stay. It wasn't the food, it was her. She was there, moving quietly around the kitchen, finishing up the last of the preparations for the next day. There was something in the way she worked that made the world feel slower, softer. She didn't seem rushed, everything she did was purposeful, each motion flowing into the next, like a dance I was lucky enough to watch. I noticed the way she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, the way her hands moved gracefully as she arranged the ingredients with such care. She was effortlessly beautiful, not in a loud, attention-grabbing way, but in the subtle, quiet elegance that made you want to pay attention. I didn't mean to stare, but I found myself watching her again, drawn to her like I couldn't quite help myself. I knew she must have sensed my eyes on her, but she didn't acknowledge it, she just kept moving, as if nothing had changed between us. But I could feel it, the change. The way the air had shifted, the way we now seemed to exist in this shared space that wasn't just about food or work, but something more. There was an intimacy growing between us, unspoken and delicate, but undeniable. Finally, she looked up and caught my gaze, her eyes locking with mine for a brief but telling moment. There was no teasing or playful smile this time, just a quiet recognition. We were both aware of the tension between us, but it didn't feel awkward. Instead, it felt natural, like the next step in whatever this connection was. She walked over to the counter where I stood, her movements smooth and confident. "Do you ever just stop and think about how everything has led to this?" she asked softly, her voice low but clear. She wasn't talking about the kitchen anymore. She wasn't talking about the food. She was talking about us, about the way this evening had unfolded. Her words hung in the air between us, and for a moment, I was struck by the vulnerability in them. She wasn't just asking a question, she was opening up, allowing me to see something deeper. There was a certain honesty in her voice that made my heart skip. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment. "Yeah," I replied quietly. "I've been thinking about it all night." There was no need to say more. We both knew what was being said without words. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was like we were allowing the connection to speak for itself. The soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of the city outside filled the room, but it felt as though everything had paused, just for us. Her eyes softened, and for a moment, I saw something vulnerable in them. It was as if she had finally allowed herself to let her guard down. She reached for a glass and poured us both a drink, the sound of the liquid filling the glass sounding almost too loud in the quiet space. "Do you want to sit for a while?" she asked, the offer in her tone gentle but sincere. I nodded, surprised at how easily I agreed. She motioned toward the small table in the corner of the kitchen, and we both sat down, the space between us feeling smaller than ever before. The conversation didn't rush. We talked about simple things, food, life, the little details that didn't matter to anyone else. But with each word spoken, each laugh shared, the air between us grew more charged. There was a soft closeness between us now, an intimacy that didn't need to be spoken aloud. It was in the way we looked at each other, the way our voices seemed to lower when we spoke, as though we were both aware of the growing tension but unwilling to rush it. There was a quiet desire between us, something that simmered beneath the surface, and as we sat there together, the distance between us seemed to shrink even more. I felt it in the way she smiled, the warmth in her eyes when they met mine. I felt it in the way her hand brushed against mine when she reached for the drink. It was subtle, but there. And in that moment, I didn't need to say anything. The connection between us was real, and it was growing stronger with each passing second. It was like we were both holding our breath, waiting for the right moment to take the next step. But for now, we stayed like this, close, connected, and perfectly content in the silence. There was no rush. This was enough. The night had stretched into early morning, and the soft quiet of the kitchen wrapped around us like a warm blanket. The restaurant was long closed, and yet, it felt like time had slowed. We sat together, in the same shared space we had been in all night, but now, there was a certain peacefulness between us. Everything we had felt earlier, all the moments of tension, of hesitation, of shared silences, had led to this. I didn't know how to describe it, but it felt like we had come to an understanding, an unspoken agreement. There were no more games, no more uncertainties. What had started as a quiet curiosity between us had grown into something deeper. Something real. She sat beside me, leaning back in her chair, her hands resting on the table in front of her. There was a relaxed air about her now, a softness in her features that I hadn't seen earlier. The guarded, confident chef was still there, but underneath it all, she had let me see the vulnerability she rarely showed. And for the first time, I didn't feel like an outsider in her world. I felt like I belonged there, beside her, in the calm of the kitchen. "I'm not used to this," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. I could hear the weight of the words, the unspoken meaning behind them. She wasn't talking about the kitchen. She was talking about us, about this connection that had grown between us, about letting someone in. "I know," I replied softly, my gaze meeting hers. "I think I'm still trying to figure it out too." There was no pressure in the air, no need for anything more than what we had already shared. The intensity of the attraction between us was still there, but it wasn't overwhelming anymore. It wasn't something we needed to rush or label. It was simply there, lingering between us, in the small spaces we had carved out together. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was just, natural. It felt like we didn't need to fill the gaps with words. Everything had been said already, in the glances, the shared touches, the moments of vulnerability. There was no grand confession, no declaration of love, but there didn't need to be. We both understood each other more than words could explain. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing against mine in a soft, deliberate touch. It wasn't a grab, wasn't a desperate plea for more. It was a quiet, meaningful gesture. Her hand lingered there for just a moment, the warmth of her skin against mine grounding me in the moment. I didn't need to say anything. I didn't need to ask if she felt the same. The connection between us was already clear. As I looked at her, I felt the weight of everything we had shared. All the moments of hesitation, the questions that had lingered in the back of our minds, were now replaced with something calmer, more certain. We didn't need to rush. There was no need to figure it all out right now. What mattered was that, in this moment, we had found something real, something genuine. And that was enough. "I'm glad I stayed," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. It wasn't the grand gesture or the confession of some deep feeling, but it was the truth. Staying had been the right choice. Staying had brought me here, to this moment, with her. Her eyes softened, and she gave me the faintest of smiles. "Me too," she whispered back. And just like that, the space between us felt even smaller, even more intimate. There was no need for more words, no need to rush or figure out the future. For now, this was enough. We sat there together, in the quiet of the kitchen, the outside world forgotten. There was still a part of me that wasn't ready to leave, a part of me that wanted to stay in this moment forever. But for now, I knew that what we had shared, what we were sharing, was enough. It didn't need to be defined. It didn't need to be explained. It was simply a connection, built quietly, carefully, and without force. And that was exactly how it was meant to be. And with that, the night ended, not with a dramatic conclusion or a final declaration, but with a quiet, mutual understanding. We had reached a resolution, one that didn't require words, only the certainty that we had found something meaningful in the shared spaces between us.